you, Freddie.
You bet.
How y'all doing?
Real good.
Boy, this is my part of the country right here. I live about 2 hours north of here, north of Fort Leonard Wood, a little ways. Born and raised in the Ozarks. My family moved in here in 1837, and we still live on the same property that they homesteaded. My grandfather fought for the Union Army. I apologize for that. But he was a cavalryman in the Union Army, and when he came home, he married the niece of a Confederate colonel. So we've got both sides in our blood, but I tend to lean gray most of the time, I can tell you that. But a lot of history in our family, a lot of history in our background, and it's always been livestock. I told someone the other day, I have a copy of a letter from 1917 addressed to a U.S. congressman from Missouri in Washington, D.C. Now, my great-grandfather could not read or write, but I guarantee he could cipher. And that letter is written back to him by that U.S. congressman saying, Mr. Thornsberry, we are working on a law and a consent decree that would allow us to have more competition in the livestock markets. You might know that as the Packers and Stockyards Act. You might know that as the consent decree where all Packers agreed not to own livestock, but simply function as the entity they were supposed to be. Now, that consent decree was eliminated in 1979 by legal action, and unfortunately, President Reagan did not step up to the plate to do anything about it. The Packers and Stockyards Act today is a nothing. As Bill Bullard says, the CEO of RCAF USA, it's been castrated. And that's a pretty good way to put it. You know, that is not a unique term, being castrated or emasculated or eliminated. The Apostle Paul used that in Galatians chapter 5 when he had Judaizers trying to get all the men to go through surgery and be circumcised. He said, circumcision doesn't save you. Circumcision doesn't make you any different from anybody else. I would that all those that are asking you to do that would be emasculated. Have it all cut off if you think that's going to save you. Packers and Stockyards Act is emasculated. As a matter of fact, up until just very recently, it had no effect whatsoever. It is a law that the USDA refused to enforce, and actually just basically it didn't exist. President Biden, about 6 or 8 months ago, asked the Secretary of Ag to reinstate it. As far as I know, nothing's been done, period. Now, what was the Packers and Stockyards Act designed to do? It was designed to guarantee that there's going to be competition in the livestock markets, not just for cattle, but for hogs, for poultry, for sheep and goats. It was to eliminate 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 or 11 packers at that time from controlling the market. They put together a consent decree that kept them from feeding livestock. They voluntarily submitted to that in order to keep the government off their back. What do we got today? You have any idea how many packers we have today? Anybody heard of Cuddy Packing Company? If you took cattle to St. Louis back in the time that my great-grandfather was feeding cattle and shipping them on the railroad, you took them to the yards in East St. Louis, and on Monday morning, the packers came by and had an auction at each pen, 11 of them. Each pen of cattle, each pen of hogs, and they auctioned them off. You know that you're sitting in the last bastion of free market in the livestock industry right here, right now? You got people coming here and competing and bidding in order to purchase your livestock. The unfortunate thing in the fat cattle market, where all our feeder cattle end up eventually, there is very little competition. I don't know if you know, but in the last 10 years, about 50% of most of the fat cattle were still being sold on a free market situation. In other words, the packers would come to the feed yard and they'd offer you a price. Now, I'm talking last 10 years. I don't know if you kept track of any of the data or anything that's going on, but right now, it's about 8%. Most of these cattle are all forward contracted. If they're not forward contracted, the packer owns them themselves. And so the demand for our feeder cattle is directly impacted by what takes place in the fat cattle market. Now, I used to play the fat cattle market. I know all about puts and calls, and I know all about fences and shorting and longing, and I got a lighter bank account to prove it. Well, you know, you can't hardly even do that today. You know, almost all those fat cattle are sold on derivatives. You don't even know how many pens of cattle sold today. You don't have any idea how to play the market. And that's why these programs this gentleman is talking about, it becomes very important for us that are out here raising feeder calves. We can't use the market anymore. It's broken. It's primarily utilized by speculators, and I understand speculators are important for any market, but if you don't know how many loads of fat cattle sold today, how are you going to play the market? How are you going to use it to hedge? Well, I can tell you, you're not going to use it to hedge, and that's exactly what's happening. So why am I telling you all this? Why is that important to us out here in south central Missouri, that the average cow-calf producer in the southern part of Missouri's got 35 cows? But did you know Missouri is 1.94 million head of mother cows? That puts us at number 2. We're quite a ways behind number 1, which is Texas, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, you could put 3.5 Missouris in the state of Texas. So they got a lot more ground, a lot more acreage. But they have about 4.2 million cattle. Then comes Nebraska and Kansas and Oklahoma, and they fight back and forth for number 3, 4, and 5, and they're pretty close to the same number of cows. As Freddie was saying, it is a foundation of our rural economy. I was born in 1953. I raised hogs. I had the Reserve Grand Champion Yorkshire Gilt at the Missouri State Fair in 1969. And as I was driving down through here with my wife today, I said, well, that guy used to raise hogs. He was a client of mine. That guy used to raise hogs. That guy used to raise hogs. You know, there are no hogs in southern Missouri. Few 4-H and FFA projects. I venture to say that you could take a 20-foot gooseneck and go through 4 or 5 counties of our part of the state and not fill it with independently owned hogs. And at one time, we were the feeder pig capital of the world. How many are old enough to remember Pig Paul? Anybody remember Mr. Hines? Now, West Plains was, Willow Springs, West Plains, the feeder pig capital of the world. There are no feeder pigs anymore. Why is that? What happened? That took a viable industry that everybody went to town on Saturday and bought wire and nails and lumber and feed and waterers and feeders and medicine. And what happened to all that? How come they don't do that anymore? Because that industry has been fully integrated. It's like the poultry industry, which was integrated in the late 50s and 60s. In my part of the state, I can take you to decrepit, decaying, and fallen down broiler houses in about any direction from where I live. You know, you could put together a broiler house today. I've got a degree in agriculture. We were talking here. You graduated in 87 with an ag econ degree. I graduated with an animal husbandry degree. We could put our heads together and raise the best set of broilers you ever saw in your life. Where would I sell them? Sell a few of them off the back of the truck at the farmer's market, maybe? Now, these industries are fully integrated. They're gone. They're not open to you, and they're not open to me, and there is no market. In other words, you don't have any idea what a broiler's worth. You don't have any idea what a feeder pig's worth because there is no market. The market is gone. When I got out of vet school in 1977, about 85% of my practice was hogs. I went to school to become a swine veterinarian. And you go to the American Association of Swine Practitioners meeting, and there'd be 700 or 800 of us there trying to learn something about hog diseases and hog management, hog nutrition. In 1985, I didn't have a feeder pig customer. Not a one. From 77 to 85. That's not very long. That's how fast and how quickly the hog market was integrated and southern Missouri was put out of business. Say, oh, it can't happen to the cattle industry. Oh, it's not possible. They don't want to own all this land. Listen, they don't have to own the land. All they got to do is own the market. That's it. They own the market in hogs. They own the market in poultry, turkeys, broilers, eggs. Bible egg has made quite a bit of difference here in this area recently in the last few years, and a phenomenal plan they have. I know several people raising natural eggs for them, and it's worked. It's worked. There's always some hope, is there not? Even in a fully integrated business. But I'm going to tell you that if we're not careful, if we're not active, if we don't participate, we're going to see a gradual integration in this cattle industry to the point that they may not come out here and buy all the land and own all the cows. But do you know, during that COVID outbreak, did you know that the demand for beef is the highest it's ever been in the history of the United States of America? In our little AW grocery store, my wife went in there about 2 weeks after we had to shut down. And did you know the only thing left in that store was some package of hamburger? Richland, Missouri, out in the middle of nowhere. No meat. They bought it up. They hoarded it. They put it in their freezers. They were scared to death. The demand was as high as it's ever been in the history of the United States. And the cattle market dropped 50 and 60 bucks a hundredweight. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that you've had a harbinger. You've had a harbinger of how the market is starting to become broken in the cattle industry. For years, I was the president of the fair board in Richland, Missouri. We have a tri-county fair. I don't know if you've ever been president of the fair board, but I'd recommend you not do it. I'd recommend you not do it.
Been there.
Probably 6 years, Brenda, I would say, that we worked to get people to come in to bid on those kids' steers and on their hogs and their lambs. And you know that we were lucky for 6 years. I think I was on there up until about 2000 to get a $65 a hundredweight bottom. $65 a hundredweight bottom for our fat steers for 6 years. We didn't see $1 for fat cattle until we found the BSE cow from Canada in Washington State. And we shut off all imports from Canada, and all of a sudden we had $1 fat cattle. Never had seen $1 fat cattle. I remember sitting in a meeting with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Secretary of Agriculture, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in middle part of 2004. The cow was discovered about Christmas time, 2003, shut off all exports for our country, shut off all exports for Canada. We now were supplying the beef for our own population, and we started getting prices that were reasonable. Now, I'm not here to tell you that I'm against all trade. I'm not necessarily against trade, but I am against unfair trade. I want to give you an example here. The World Trade Organization. You know what that is, the WTO? It's something our government got involved in. It's supposed to improve our basic import-export balance economy. Now, I think it probably did that for certain things, manufactured goods, but I can tell you it did not do much good for the cattle industry. It opened us up to have to import beef from countries you never heard of. You never heard of it. Unbelievable in reality. And it also took the control, or at least participation in our own market, out of our own hands. And I'm going to give you an example. RCAF USA and a lot of other cattle industries worked diligently to get country of origin labeling passed. We got it passed and put into effect about 2014. Well, Canada and Mexico didn't like that because, lo and behold, the American consumer didn't want to buy a piece of Canadian beef. They didn't want to buy a piece of Mexican beef. I went to Walmart over there in Kansas one day when I was going to give a speech, and I went through the meat counter and I found some hamburgers in there. They were called Black Angus burgers. That was the name of them, Black Angus burgers, from 7 different countries listed on the label. Countries you never heard of. Well, I'm pretty sure that when I was in some of those countries, I didn't see many Black Angus cattle. I saw lots of Bremer cattle, but I didn't see many Black Angus cattle. And the American consumer wanted to support U.S. producers, and they wanted to buy U.S. meat. And if it said product of Canada and Mexico and Timbuktu, they didn't buy it. And cattle prices increased. As a matter of fact, I think we peaked out in about the middle part of 2014, maybe the first part of 2015, with the best fat cattle prices and the best feeder cattle prices that we'd ever seen. We were suddenly getting over $2 a pound for a 500-pound calf, and we could make some money. Tractors were sold, disc mines were sold, balers were sold, ground was fertilized, and we had a little bit of money in the bank. Well, the World Trade Organization brought suit against the United States and said that we were practicing unfairly market restriction. Now, I went to Canada during that time, and all their meat was labeled. Every bit of it. Most of it come from Australia. I was on the west coast. It came from Australia and New Zealand. Clearly labeled, wasn't it, Brenda? We went in there and took pictures of it clandestinely. They didn't want us to take any pictures, but I did anyway. That's the fine thing about smartphones, you know. You can take pictures and nobody even know it. I have to tell you, they brought suit against us and they threatened to fine us. And the fine was going to be $30 million a year. And they brought it before Congress, and Congress voted to repeal country of origin label. Well, do you know what $30 million a year fine is if you want it? I'd say, come and collect the damn fine. See how that works for you. President Trump got us out of the World Trade Organization, and President Biden put us right back in it. Well, let me tell you what a $30 million fine was. $1 a cow. Would you pay $1 a cow for $2 a pound for a black steer weighing 600 pounds? Boy, I would. In a minute. In a New York minute. And so what happened is our politicians caved to the World Trade Organization, which we owe nothing to. It was an unfair tribunal. One person on the tribunal from Mexico, no U.S. representation at all. These little podunk countries get the same representation as we do, and they hate the United States, and so they voted against us. Now, you know the Vicky Hartsworth voted to get rid of country of origin label? She sure did.
7 of our 8 reps did.
The only one that didn't was a Democrat.
Kansas City area, right?
St. Louis.
St. Louis.
McCaskill didn't vote to get rid of it. I don't know if you get it, but I ain't a Democrat. What a shame. What a shame. Give away our sovereignty give away the best market we've ever had for $1 a cow. Incomprehensible. And so in 2016, we lost country of origin labeling, and our prices have been down ever since. We had a little jump here recently. We're always in a deficit. They're always telling us about how we need more demand. Neville Spear from University of Kentucky is always putting these things out. The market's fine. The market's not broke. Everything's just fine. It always amazes me that all these experts get to tell what the market is and what we should be doing. They don't own one cow. Not paid $1 worth of property taxes on a farm, on equipment, on cattle. But they're going to tell me what I need to do. Well, I can tell you it doesn't take long to understand the market ain't right. And we run the risk of the same thing that happened to the hog business and the poultry business. No, they're not going to come out here and raise the cows. They're not going to invest that much money. They're not stupid. What they're going to do is they're going to control the market, and more and more and more of it. Right now, if they import meat from Brazil, I've been all through South America and Central America. You know, there are a few colored cattle down there, but it's hot down there right now, Freddie, and it's hot down there all year long. And so most of those cattle are Brahma cattle. White Brahmers, red Brahmers, gray Brahmers, beautiful cattle. Absolutely phenomenal genetics. And haven't got, if they had to cut a piece of marble meat out of there, the rapture came and I missed it. I was in San Jose, Costa Rica, 2005. I went down on a field trip, a market evaluation trip for our calf. And I went to a big, Costa Rica is the richest country in Central America. Lots of wealth there, lots of fine Mercedes Benzes and all those kinds of things floating around. So I went to what would you call it, a Costco maybe? Almost like a Sam's Club type of store. Had a guy in there from Mississippi, and I said, let's go to that meat case and let's see what we can do. So we took all the meat we could find that had a little touch of marbling in it. We rearranged the meat case and put that all on top. And then we got back and took our clandestine phone and we filmed. And the housewife would come up there and she would see that marbled meat. She'd grab that package and throw it in the back and grab one that didn't have an ounce of marbling in it. They didn't want to pay for any fat, I could tell you that. We got the best meat in the world. I've literally been all over the world. I've been to South Korea. I didn't say North Korea this time, really. I've been to South Korea. I've been to Japan. I've been to Indonesia. I hadn't been to Australia and New Zealand. I've touched Africa for a little bit. I've been through Europe, parts of Europe. I've been in Canada and Mexico and every country in Central America except Guatemala and Belize. And I'm going to tell you, there is nothing that can compare with the quality and the safety of the meat that we produce. And what packers are doing now is they're importing meat from Brazil. They're importing meat from countries in Africa. They're importing meat from countries that got foot and mouth disease. And all they have to do is take it out of that package and put it in another package, and it gets labeled as product of the USA. Now, that ain't fair. They hide it. Now, most of that meat's going into some processed product, going into ground beef. Nobody in the United States wants to buy a piece of red Bremer meat that doesn't have an ounce of fat in it. But there are some good cattle producers in areas of South America. Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay. Same latitude in the southern hemisphere as we are in the northern hemisphere. They raise Hereford cattle. They raise Angus cattle. They still have a lot of shorthorns in those areas. They feed them. They got corn. And when they export that meat, it looks just like ours. It's marbled. It's pretty. It's ready to go to the meat case. But you know, if you had a marbled piece of meat in the meat case from Uruguay and setting beside it a marbled piece of meat from the USA, you know that the consumer is going to pick the USA product?
Safety.
Safety. Food safety is their biggest issue. Consumers are on our side, folks. They support us. They stand with us. They'll fight with us to have access to good, quality, safe product for their families. Now, I could give you all kinds of numbers tonight. I could tell you how much market share we've lost. I could tell you how the consumer dollar is now, instead of 60%, 63% going to producers, it's 63% going to packers. I could tell you all those numbers, and you'll walk out of here and never remember them after you get out the front door. But I am going to tell you something I hope you do remember. There's a way for us to get back this market. There's a way for us to keep consumers on our side. There's a way for us to keep this industry from becoming fully integrated, and it's called mandatory country of origin labeling. It allows the consumer to have a free choice in what they're going to purchase for their families. We're in a different dynamic on the consuming public than we were when I was a kid in the 50s. We'd butcher a beef and fill a freezer and eat off of it for 6 months. Most of these young women, like my daughter, in their 30s, go to the grocery store. Of course, she doesn't. She comes and gets meat off me. But the average 30-year-old consuming housewife with growing kids goes to the grocery store and picks up what they're going to eat that night, that day. If you don't believe me, just go sit out in front of a Hy-Vee or a Kroger or a Piggly Wiggly or an AWG market and see for yourself. It's a different dynamic. They're looking for quality, safe product, and they will pay a premium for that born, bred, raised, manufactured, packaged in the United States of America. There are bills available right now being put out by Dr. Grassley and in the House of Representatives, Dr. Grassley, Senator Grassley, we got doctor on the brain here, and representatives that are standing behind livestock producers around the country trying to get mandatory country of origin labeling reinstated. I want you to come away with just one thing. What can I do to make sure that mandatory country of origin labeling is reinstated? You can call your U.S. representative. You can call your U.S. senator. Senator Hawley is on our side. Senator Blunt is not. He's not going to vote with you. But he's going to be out of there directly. And I think Schmidt will very likely support us. Get on the ball. Become an activist. Remember a little bit about that 2014 and 2015 when you took that load of feeder calves to the market and you come away with a $2 a pound check. Heck, I had some that brought $2.20 a pound. Remember that. Think about that. Do you know what brought that about? Having the ability to distinguish your product in the meat case so that a young lady with 2 or 3 kids at home and a husband waiting to get home can go in and grab a piece of something that she knows is safe, she knows is quality, she knows it's supporting her own neighbors out in the country. She's going to buy it, take it home, and fix it for her family, and your price is going to go up. Demand has never been higher. What we're receiving is about, you count it up in real dollars, is about as low as it's ever been. And yet, the meat case prices, in many cases, are through the roof. I saw 85.15 round the other day at $7 a pound. I don't go in the grocery store very much, but that seemed a little high to me. Become an activist. Do not be a pacifist. Decide you're going to do something to help this situation. Don't do like some of these guys I provided veterinary services for that just said, there's nothing we can do, Doc. They're buying up the industry, and I'm going to get sucked right up with it. I don't believe that. I believe we have a tool that will allow us to stay in business. I believe we have a tool that will allow us to get a decent return for our product and provide the American consumer with exactly what she's looking for. USA raised, USA born, USA packaged, USA processed, and safe and wholesome. Be an activist. Thank you.